Hello and welcome to Showdown Breakdown Thursday night, week 2 kickoff. Josh Allen at Tua Tagovailoa to discuss all angles of tonight's game from a Showdown perspective. I'm joined by the Showdown bros you know and love, Cody Main and Sam Brott. Cody, how's it going today?
I'm good. It's actually been a fun start to the season as far as island games are concerned. We've had a ton of really good games, a ton of high totals, a ton of good quarterback play, and I think we'll see much of the same here. Bills and Dolphins.
Yeah, the best games have been island games. The regular games have been total dust balls, but the island games, Cody has gotten a treat here with the Showdown stuff. Sam, how's it going today?
Going pretty well. I didn't get fired after debuting last week, and somehow I was invited back. So I'd say going pretty well.
Sam is back in the mix. Yes, indeed. We'll go over some sim stuff later on in the show. One thing I wanted to hit on at the top here, Cody, is kind of what's going on with the way DraftKings is pricing Showdown. It stuck out to me right away that quarterbacks have been depressed in their price, and that's certainly changed a lot here. I don't know, Cody. I know it's only been a few of these big ones so far, but any takeaways on macro Showdown strategy, considering how DraftKings has changed how they're pricing these slates?
Yeah, I think we should preface by saying we only are, 5 slates in, if we want to include this one, 5 primetime slates, that is. But it does kind of seem like, at least at this point, the macro trend, at least the one that we can kind of take away from here, is that quarterback pricing is really depressed. And I think in most cases, if you just look back at the same players from the previous year, and we've had a lot of quarterbacks that we've had on Showdown slates. I'm talking Lamar Jackson, Patrick Mahomes, Jalen Hurts, Jordan Love. Now we've got Tua and Josh Allen. These are teams that are heavily featured in primetime games. We have a decent sample here to look back on, even from just last year. I think in most cases, the quarterbacks, same quarterback the following year is $600, $800, $1,000 cheaper than they would have been last year, which I think is really important for cash game contests specifically. Anything close to an optimal lineup, these quarterbacks just look like such better plays because they're a little bit cheaper. They're easier to stack. The floor is safer. The ceiling still remains pretty high. And it just sets up as a situation where in any type of optimal format, the quarterbacks just grade out as better plays. And they were already great plays prior. And I think the other takeaway is even some of these skill position players. We've had A.J. Brown, who felt a little bit closer to appropriately priced on that Friday night slate, but like Tyreek. And we've had some of these guys that are at the top of their position, respectively, running backs and wide receivers, that have been a little bit cheaper as well. And the value options, and granted, we've had some big injuries on some of these slates as well. So we'll talk about one specifically on this one, but it's just funneling us all towards these stars and scrubs heavy approaches. We had Jordan Mason, who was really cheap after CMC was ruled out. It's kind of a unique situation, but I still think in general, we're getting the top of the board is a little bit cheaper than it should be. The mid tier is a little bit more expensive than maybe it should be. And then the true punts, the true value options have been a little bit cheaper in a lot of cases too. So you're getting these barbell type lineups where you're spending a lot up at the top with the studs and then having the room left over to kind of fall into these value options. We'll see if that remains. Again, only 4 or 5 slates in, and some major injuries have kind of shifted things. But I think that's kind of my macro takeaway is anything close to optimal right now just seems to be very stars and scrubs heavy.
Yeah, and I feel like that's going to continue tonight because we have Raheem Mostert already ruled out, and we have Devon Achane questionable. We are projecting Devon Achane to play in this game. We'll talk about how we have docked Devon Achane for this injury stuff, but you get guys like Jeff Wilson, you get guys like Jalen Wright extremely cheap, and that can lead to more stars and scrubs type lineups where if the quarterback is 1,000 cheaper than he should be, it's going to be way easier to make. For this game, man, and we have some real tail guys here. I mean, look at the tail. Look at the right tails on Achane and Mostert, who's obviously not playing, but Tyreek Hill. Josh Allen is just absolutely absurd, the thickness of this right tail. James Cook as well. Macro thoughts on this game, Sam Brott, knowing that we have so many guys who I don't know. I'm like, let me play Josh Allen and Tyreek Hill together, and it's just an absolute smash. I'm sure that's what everyone else is thinking as well.
Yeah, I definitely think that you guys hit on it. Like, kind of the story of tonight is this pricing situation, how easy it's going to be to jam in all these super high-end guys. But I think what we need to remind ourselves is just that, yeah, Devon Achane, Josh Allen, Tyreek Hill, all these guys can reach that ceiling, but the likelihood of all of them hitting their ceiling in this game is still pretty low. So I think if we have a portfolio of lineups, we need to kind of diversify and limit our exposure in our aggregate here to not have too much of any of these guys, so that we can maybe get some more balanced lineups and find a way to be unique that way. Because if we're playing, Jeff Wilson captain with all the studs in there, then our best shot is to chop that about 1,000 ways. So
yeah, exactly. Okay.
Together just isn't going to be possible.
Right. And we'll get into that here in a second. One thing that struck out to me right away on the slate, I was like, oh, let me just run some optimals for this slate and see what's coming through. Our optimals are 9 out of our top 10 optimals are 5 Miami players, 1 Bills player. Then I came to Cody's projection here. 14.6% for a game with a 2.5 point spread is a massive number on the 5-1 Bills, 5-1 Dolphins side. Like, you just don't really see that often, I don't think, when the spread is close like this. And I actually think the Bills can win the game and play well and win the game relatively easily. So I was actually like shocked here to see 15% on this. My lean is that if people are going to be playing 5-1 Miami at such a high rate, Cody, I don't want to be playing 5-1 Miami really at all. What do you think about what's coming through here on roster construction?
Yeah, frankly, I think both of these numbers here, the 4-2 Miami, 4 Miami, 2 Buffalo lineups at 35.3%, going to be even higher, and the 5 Miami, 1 Buffalo lineups going to be even higher. If, as you alluded to, if you just run our projections through the solver optimizer, you're going to get even way more than that. I think, like you pointed out, some people are going to be setting some groups and rules to avoid a ton of it. I think some people will be boosting some of these Bills players as well. I think there will be some hand builders who think, this is a Bills team that can put up a bunch of points. It's a 2.5 point spread. Let's balance these things out a little bit. But I think in any contest where there's more projection heavy lineups being submitted, you're going to see these numbers come even up. So I'm in agreement with you that if you're looking for a way to get different, how can we find some lineups that are featuring a few more Bills players? These lineups that are like 2-4, 1-5 going to be drastically lower owned in smaller field contests where projections are a little bit more important. And so those are lineups that I'm looking into, but I don't want to completely exclude some of these other lineups that are projecting to be a little bit more popular. I just want to be mindful about how I'm building lineups in those types of constructions.
Yeah, if you go over here to the solver, and if you guys do have the add-on from ETR, add on the solver subscription for the optimizer, there is a screen here in the advanced settings where you can say, listen, Opto, I don't want any 5 Miami 1 Bills. In fact, I don't want any 4 Miami 2 Bills either, right? And then, that'll save. And you can run top 10 lineups like that or whatever you want, 150 lineups, whatever you want. And you'll start to see lineups that come through that are like that. I'm not sure that's the right thing to do, Sam. If you were going in here and said, I don't want to have this Miami heavy stuff, what kind of levers do you think you'd pull in the optimizer? And then I can also show some of the sim stuff as well.
Yeah, I don't try to kind of overthink about the specific constructions. I think it's definitely helped to know these percentages and think about it so that you know what the field's going to do. But ultimately, I think what I want to do is just have lineups that I think are well constructed and have a clear path to actually being optimal without being duped. And so that's really what I'm going for rather than specifically ruling out certain constructions.
Yeah. And so just to show the people, if I hit sim here on those lineups, it gives you lineups that we ran. It gives you our projected sim ROI, projected cash rate, ceiling for all these teams. And if you click on them, you can see some of this stuff. Just to be clear for people using this, Sam, the reason that it looks so high on the top 1% stuff is because of, maybe I should just let you explain it. You'll explain it way better than me.
Yeah. So if you want to pull up one of those charts, there we go. So yeah, basically in Showdown, there's kind of a finite number of lineups that you can create. It's in the many tens of thousands. It's not a tiny number, but it is still a more finite number of lineups that are potentially optimal as opposed to like a Sunday main slate when we have 9 roster spots and many more teams. So if you stumble onto one of the lineups that we have optimal in one of our 20,000 sims behind the scenes, then it's going to have a really high sim ROI. So that's not to say that the ROI isn't correct or that you shouldn't take note of it. Just that in reality, it might not be quite as high. It's more about being directionally correct here rather than specific magnitude of correctness.
Exactly. And that's the point that for anyone that is using solver sims, I want to be clear that, this 340% ROI is too high. It's assuming that our assumptions are correct. And then all the stuff that Sam said also plays into it, but it's directionally correct, right? Like, I feel like this top lineup here is better than the bottom lineup. Is that fair to say, Sam? Like, if I was picking between these two, this one at the top is better than this one at the bottom, just directionally correct.
Yep, exactly.
Okay.
Use it as a directional check.
All right. Let's get into the game here tonight from a macro perspective, Cody. We have 48.5 point total. We have the Dolphins favored by 2.5 here in this game. What we saw from the Bills in week 1 was extreme run heavy. Not extreme, very run heavy, I would say. And then you also get this situation where they got behind, and we've seen it so many times. Josh Allen's just like, screw it, man. I'm going to go Superman and win this game for my team. Anytime they get around the 10-5, I feel like Allen is just looking for places to run. He accounts for such a huge portion of his team's touchdowns. We do have Josh Allen as the highest projected base projection, but only 0.1 ahead of Tyreek. So any macro thoughts here on this game, Cody?
Yeah, I think the biggest takeaway is their pass rate over expectations since Joe Brady has taken over as offensive coordinator last year in week 11 has been extremely low. And that's kind of been the case throughout his tenure here. Minus 2.9% pass rate over expectation, had 6 straight games to close the 2023 season with a negative pass rate over expectation. And really the only game where they were kind of came out gunning was against Kansas City at Arrowhead, a team where I feel like they knew they needed to put points on the board to keep up and really kind of pump the pass rate up a little bit. That continued in week 1, minus 7% pass rate over expectation, a 48% situation neutral pass rate. This isn't like the Josh Allen that used to kind of give us like 300-yard passing upside routinely, would add 50 yards on the ground, going to rush for a touchdown. But it is still a quarterback who I think in showdown slates, specifically where he's priced at 11K, and in optimal formats is kind of still a little bit of a cheat code. I think he's a little bit too cheap here. I think the floor is incredibly safe. I think as a result of how difficult it is to stack him or how difficult it is perceived by the field to stack him, given the pass game options that he's got around him now, I think you're actually going to see captain ownership and total ownership be a little bit lower on Allen in this slate than it has been in the past. I think he checks out as a phenomenal play. I think in most instances, I'd rather have him as a flex than a captain. And I think that kind of is borne out in the way the Sims treat him as well. But I still think a really phenomenal play. Should be 100% owned in cash game contests and probably won't be. So I'll take advantage there as well. But even though he's not the Josh Allen of old, I still think a really phenomenal showdown play.
Yeah, it's interesting the captain stuff, Sam. Like, the problem that people are going to have with Josh Allen is I don't know who to stack him with, right? That's what people are going to keep saying. And so it's like, you know what? Let me just play him in flex, because if I play him in captain, then I probably need some wide receiver production there. How do you think about Josh Allen in captain type teams versus flex type teams, Sam?
Yeah, I think when I don't stack Josh Allen, I like him better in captain, because if he gets there in a really big way, he's probably rushing, in which case he doesn't need to drag people along, his receivers along. But I think tonight's a little bit interesting, because in the past, when we have Josh Allen on a showdown slate, we usually have Steph Diggs priced right around him. We used to have Gabe Davis usually priced around like 7K or so. So he wasn't super easy to fit. And now all of a sudden, his most expensive pass catcher tonight, if you don't want to include James Cook there, is $7,200 Dalton Kincaid. And then you have a bunch of guys, including some like real values down in the 1 and 2K range, all at very reasonable prices. So I don't know exactly how stacked he'll end up being, because all the Miami guys project so well and also have good value. But I do think if you want to stack Josh Allen, if you want to double stack him, like, you certainly can tonight.
Yeah, it's interesting. We'll get to these pass catchers here in a second, but I think if you do have a take on someone consolidating for Buffalo, tonight's the night to play it, right? Because everybody's kind of throwing their hands up being like, well, Josh Allen's just going to spread the ball around. But what if he doesn't? What if tonight it consolidates? And I think that's an angle that someone out there could take. I'll talk about who I think will consolidate when we get to that, but yeah.
Yeah, and I think too, like especially in hand builds, we sometimes see the field overreact a little bit to the most recent game, and we just saw Josh Allen kind of do it all himself without carrying anybody along. So I wouldn't be surprised if he does come in naked at captain a little bit more than we would normally see tonight.
Yeah, agreed. On the other side, Cody, you have a quarterback that I think you must stack, right? Like if Tua Tagovailoa has a huge game, not only is it carrying along pass catchers, but we're pretty sure exactly which pass catchers it's going to be. Now, I assume Tua Tyreek stacks are going to be some of those popular on this entire slate, especially Tyreek at captain and Tua in flex. I feel like is just going to be mega chalk. But yeah, Cody, thoughts on playing Tua Tagovailoa tonight? And he does seem really, really cheap. I mean, 9,400 for a quarterback with a ceiling is very cheap.
Yeah, it's a problem. I think the DraftKings is overacting a little bit, specifically on these pocket passers. Maybe you can make the case that Allen at 11K as a road underdog, not throwing nearly as much as they have in the past, is probably closer to appropriately priced. But like Tua, they're pricing Tua at 9,400 in this Mike McDaniel offense with Tyreek and Jalen Waddle and all these other options around him, as if he's like Trevor Siemian. These are the price tags that we were paying for Trevor Siemian and Tyson Bagent and Zach Wilson last year. It's just a little bit too cheap. And as far as cash game contests go, another one that I think is pretty much just a stone cold lock in cash game contests, given the floor that the quarterback position provides. And another one that in tournaments, I would much rather have Tua in flex in lineups where I have a Dolphin at captain, as opposed to having Tua at captain and then having multiple Dolphins in the flex. Part of that's just like the way that DraftKings scoring sets up. If Tua provides a slate winning type score, I just think it's way more likely that Tyreek or Waddle or Achane or somebody else on this team outscores him straight up. And then I just rather have that production at captain and then move Tua into the flex. So, I'm not going to rule it out outright, but I do think that I would much rather just keep him in the flex and get a little bit underweight that 7 or 8% exposure that we have at captain as of right now and take big stands on some of these other Dolphins skill position players.
Yeah. I mean, for me, Sam, I know we've talked about this. Tua is a hard sell in captain like Cody just talked about, because it's so concentrated. It's really likely if Tua goes over 300 that one of his receivers is just going to go absolutely nuts, and that's going to be more ideal in captain. But I could see it being contrarian. We only have 7% Tua captain here. Sam, what do you think about handling Tua tonight?
Yeah, I agree with everything you guys just pointed out. I really want to play Tua in captain tonight because I think it's going to be contrarian, especially in hand builds, and that's kind of more of the stuff that I play. I could see that 7% coming down, maybe even like 3 or 4% in some real small hand builds. But like you guys said, it's just really hard for him to be the optimal captain. I think if he is the optimal captain, certainly he's throwing multiple touchdown passes and he's spreading it around. And those guys that he spreads it around to, it could be a random, Durham Smythe touchdown, Jonnu Smith, something like that. And if those guys catch just one touchdown, they're probably not finding the optimal at like 8 or 9 total points. So I think if you are playing him in captain, you might not even try to get too perfect with finding his receivers. I think most of the lineups that do have him in captain will probably have a double stack Tyreek and Waddle. So maybe choosing one of them and then hoping that the other touchdowns go to some no names and then spread around. Like that's kind of the ideal path that I would be looking for.
Yeah. One thing I do want to say is that Tua and this Dolphins offense has struggled historically against the Bills over the last, 1 to 3 years or so. I mean, Bills defense has done a really good job, and Bills defense did a good job against the Cardinals on Sunday as well. My contrarian lean on this game, if I was gonna be like, tell yourself a story, Bills and under, right? And I'm not saying I'm gonna go bet it or anything like that, but I think that's like a sharp way to play the game. Bills win the game and it stays under. Obviously, that those kind of lines would not include much Tua in them. All right, let's get to the story of the day. Raheem Mostert has been ruled out with a chest injury. Now, for anyone out there thinking about what to do in season long, Mostert's injury does not sound overly serious. He's not going to go on IR. It is a short week. Maybe it was a longer week, he would have played. Achane, on the other hand, hurt his ankle a little bit in the game. I did see video of him practicing yesterday. Looked like he was fine. He put out something on Instagram today, like he's ready to rock. or whatever. We consider a game time decision, so we'll be watching this. But for now, we are projecting Achane in. We have him for 45% of Miami's carries, roughly 10.7 carries for him in this game. If we thought he was 100% in this game, we would have him for 1 or 2 more carries. We did not put any docs on Achane pass catching stuff. So, I mean, they're so thin at wide receiver. I mean, we're talking about Berrios as their third receiver and like nothing beyond that, really. The way they used De'Von Achane in week 1 was awesome. I mean, 7 targets. He lined up slot or wide. I think it was like 15 out of his 34 snaps. They threw him the ball a lot behind the line of scrimmage, but he's so good on yak. So people might be scared by this Q tag here. Cody, it's a short week. I get the concern. I still want to play him. What do you think about handling Achane tonight? And how do you think the field will handle Achane?
Yeah, I'm with you. At 9,600 with Mostert already ruled out, with signs kind of pointing in the direction that he is going to play, assuming we get bullish or even just net neutral reports leading up to game time. I think that, around 50%, even higher could hold. And I could see him coming in even higher at captain. I think if people do want to play him, they'll certainly want to play him for that nuclear upside that we know De'Von Achane has. And so I think you could see him come in over 12.5% at captain, maybe closer to 15% or so. But for all the right reasons. His primary backup already being ruled out, had a pretty good share of the team's rushing attempts. The stuff out of the as far as like a receiver goes was awesome. Ran around on 59% of dropbacks, was in the backfield for 40% of those, slot for 40%, out wide for 15%. You already mentioned like their tight end and wide receiver 3 situation is kind of gross, for lack of a better term. So I think people are going to be excited about Achane for all the right reasons. I am as well. But we should acknowledge here there's a lot of input volatility, not knowing his status, not really knowing how much they're going to want to use the running backs behind him. And that kind of creates a situation where if you have a contrarian take or you think that maybe he's a little bit more injured or the risk of re-injury is higher than maybe our projections led on, you can certainly gain some leverage by not going to a 50 to 55% on De'Von Achane.
Sure. And there's some chance he fails on efficiency, right? I don't think that he will. But we have massive efficiency. I mean, we have 18 points for him and only 10 carries, 10.7 carries, and obviously there's a lot of pass catching stuff baked in there as well. But yeah, he could fail in efficiency too. I think that if the field is scared to play him, though, I want to play him. We do have a pretty big ownership projection on him here. The interesting other part of this, Sam, and I do want your take on Achane also, but this Jeff Wilson versus Jalen Wright stuff. So Jalen Wright, the rookie they traded up for in the draft, was a healthy scratch in week 1. I don't want to say that definitely means that Jeff Wilson is ahead on offense. Jeff Wilson was on their punt return team. Jeff Wilson was on their punt coverage team. And maybe Jalen Wright's not ready to play special teams, so they were like, we'll leave Jeff Wilson up. But when it comes to offense, maybe Jalen Wright is ahead. We're not projecting it that way, but I think that's at least possible. We don't have that big ownership gap, though, between Wilson and Wright. Like, I think in most base scenarios, Wilson's probably ahead, but Wright is by far the more explosive player. Anyways, any more thoughts on Dolphins running back tonight here, Sam?
Yeah, I don't have a strong lean on how they'll use these running backs. I guess if I had a guess, I think that Jeff Wilson just kind of slides into the Raheem Mostert role, especially because it's early in the season. I think if they really wanted Jalen Wright involved, they probably would have had him active last week. But I totally understand your point that they needed Wilson on special teams. But it's also a Thursday. It's a really short week. So yeah. I kind of like leaning into the Jeff Wilson side here, especially if that ownership does hold. But ultimately, I'm pretty excited about Miami's run game overall here. And especially after we saw the Bills defense just kind of funnel targets to James Conner last week, whether that was game planned or not. But either way, I like having a lot of exposure to all of these guys on Miami.
Yeah. To be clear, we have 8.1 carries for Jeff Wilson tonight, 4.0 for Jalen Wright. If you think that's tighter or wider, you can adjust accordingly, certainly. On the other side, I thought James Cook played a really good game against Arizona. Problem is, when they get down inside the 10, it's just like, you know what? Josh Allen's just going to crash through a wall and score a touchdown. So it's hard on James Cook. I think that if we miss on ownership, I could see him being even lighter here, Cody, at 9K, considering what's around him in the narrative, which is honestly not even narrative. It's true. Josh Allen's stealing so many goal line carries. Any thoughts on Bills running back tonight?
Yeah, the interesting thing is I thought James Cook, prior to the Raheem Mostert news, was actually a kind of fringe cash game option. And then once he gets ruled out, it obviously makes HN better. It gives you the salary to get down to Jeff Wilson or Jalen Wright, depending on who you like the most. And then that kind of affords you the ability to get back up to those studs that we've already talked about, and a couple that we'll talk about in a second. And it kind of just leaves James Cook in no man's land. 38.2% projected ownership right now, 6.3% at captain. All of the data supporting that Josh Allen's going to steal some of those red zone and goal line touches, I think, is certainly going to be in the back of people's minds. But like, still, frankly, especially if you think that this game is going to play under the total and Buffalo might win in some of those Buffalo heavy lineups, I think James Cook makes for an awesome play. He did handle 63.3% of the team's rushing attempts, was involved for 37.5% of the red zone attempts, did get the one carry inside the 5-yard line last week, and still pretty involved as a receiver as well. I know Ray Davis is there and people were excited about him during best ball season, but doesn't seem to be mixing in all that much as of yet. That could change as the season progresses a little bit, of course. And Ty Johnson, who's always kind of a fly in the ointment there a little bit, is going to steal some pass down work. But I think as long as this game plays close, which Vegas is expecting it to do, I think James Cook makes for a pretty awesome contrarian play who still has that slate winning type upside at 9K.
Yeah, I'm just checking the injury report. I'm actually surprised that Ty Johnson ended up not on the final injury report. He is going to play. I saw him bang up his knee. So, yeah, he'll be in there at 2,200. Very, very lightly owned. Sam, let's go to Bills pass catchers. I think this is the story of the slate. If you want to play, like me, something contrarian, something Buffalo heavy that's contrarian, I feel like I need a Buffalo pass catcher in there. I don't know if you agree with that or not. From a usage perspective, in week one, it was clear Keon Coleman ran the most routes, had the best target share. Dalton Kincaid ran a ton of routes. He ran the second most routes on the team, but target share was absolutely brutal. My lean to consolidate, if I had to pick one to consolidate tonight, remains Dalton Kincaid. Maybe I'm clinging to my priors from the preseason too much here, but just the way he was used in week one, I want to keep betting on him as the one that earns the targets. Now, you could say, listen, man, he's not that good. He's not that good at earning targets. Dawson Knox is out there, etc. I'm just going to give it more than 1 week before I say, Dalton Kincaid can't earn targets. So I don't know, Sam, what do you think about, do you think if you want to play Allen heavy stuff, do you need a Bills pass catcher? And if so, which ones do you like tonight?
Yeah, I don't think you have to have any certain number of Bills pass catcher. I think playing Allen naked is fine. I think probably the most common way to build with Allen is probably one pass catcher. But even then, there's so many different options that any one you choose isn't going to be too popular. Maybe Coleman will be the most popular. But even then, you're not getting too popular. And then if you want to pair him with 2 or even 3, then you're really going to get unique pretty fast. I think the Kincaid stuff's really interesting. I know I was kind of an outlier within ETR as far as I wasn't really on him. I wrote him up in our staff bus article, and I certainly don't think Kincaid is bad by any means. I just don't think that the ADP he had this season, and that translates to the salary that we see for him in DK, is really deserving or that price for him is usually deserving of a tight end that is more like commanding targets. We know Kincaid earns targets for sure, but he's not the kind of guy, at least in my mind, that when he's out there, he needs to be given the ball the way we see like Kelsey, for example. So would I be surprised at all if Kincaid got 10 targets tonight? Absolutely not. And I definitely want exposure to him. But I'm kind of in this weird spot where I don't love Kincaid, but if he's going to come in at that ownership, then I love him as a play tonight.
Well, that's the thing about all the Bills pass catchers, right? They're all a little bit overpriced, or at least like to the naked eye, you're going to see way better quote unquote values on the Miami side. It's like, well, they're just going to spread the ball around. How can I pay 6,200 for Shakir, 7,200 for Kincaid, or 5,800 for Coleman? How can I do that when they're just going to spread the ball around? Again, I think if you can find who consolidates tonight, that is, to me, the key to the slate. I think overpay to be contrarian a little bit on Kincaid would be my lean here. I also like Shakir. I would note that on Curtis Samuel, only ran 9 routes last week. We're projecting a little bit more for him off that turf toe thing this week, but it's a short week. Seems like an unideal time for him to like really get ramped up. So 5,400 for Curtis Samuel is very, very expensive. Cody, any more thoughts here on Bills pass catchers?
Yeah, I think my macro takeaway here is that, and you guys kind of alluded to it, like all of these guys are going to come down in ownership. At least the more expensive ones. We're already pretty light on some of these cheap guys like Dawson Knox at 2,600 and Matt Collins at 1,600. But now with the value opening up with Jalen Wright and Jeff Wilson, you really don't need to go here as often as you might have thought you would when you first opened the slate. So I actually don't think those guys are going to get too steamed up. The one that feels like the most overpriced, that feels like the easiest cross off if you're trying to make some of those adjustments now is Curtis Samuel. You mentioned it 9 routes last week. I don't really see a reason for his route participation to go up this week. There wasn't much discussion of that happening at all anyway. And at 5,400, like he's actually got to do something to pay off that price tag. Really low ADOT roll in kind of a low volume pass offense. He seems like the clear cross off of the top guys or the more expensive guys. I think the one that I'm most excited about is the one that, and I don't want to compare this guy to Stephon Diggs, but on the same team, if there's one guy that could become Stephon Diggs here just based off of usage profile, I think it is Keon Coleman. We might look back in a few weeks, and I know it didn't seem that way in week 1, but we might look back in a few weeks and think it was kind of silly that this guy was 5,800 as the Bills clear-cut wide receiver 1. The route participation was obviously good. He's going to be lined up on the perimeter a lot. And I think he's a guy that profiles to get some of those short designed targets to get the ball into his hands, but we'll also see some of those deep targets. We've seen those guys and they're generally pretty attractive in showdown slates because they offer a good floor, but also have a slate winning type ceiling to them as well. The one that comes to mind a little bit is Zay Flowers. He sees a lot of those designed short area stuff, but then we'll see the occasional 20+ yard downfield target. And I kind of feel that same way about Coleman. So at 5,800, if I get the sense that ownership is going to come down, which I kind of think it will, maybe not drastically, but a little bit, Coleman, I think, is the one that I'm most excited about as far as a guy that could give me a slate winning score in a tournament.
Yeah. In terms of the punts, Matt Collins at 1,600 ran 20 routes on 30 Josh Allen dropbacks last week, scored the touchdown. I'm a little worried people are going to use Matt Collins as like their preferred punt a lot here tonight as part of Allen teams, and maybe as when people roster Allen captain, etc., it's going to include Matt Collins for salary relief a lot. But yeah, I think that's one to note. On the other side here, Sam, I mean, it seems like Tyreek Hill is unstoppable. I mean, going back to the beginning of last season, just absolutely incredible, unstoppable Tyreek Hill. I will note, though, and it's in Silva's column here, I'll bring it up here in a second, Bills have done a very good job on Tyreek Hill. We have 68.8% total ownership and 21% captain on Tyreek. Sam, how do you think we can handle Tyreek smartly here tonight?
Yeah, it's tough because when you have kind of this expensive receiver like this, it kind of funnels you into a specific build. If you're building for one of those Tyreek explosion games, then you want to put him in captain. And if you want to put him in captain, you usually want to have Tua in flex. And so you're eating up a lot of your salary right away doing that. So I think you definitely need to be very, considerate about how you're building with Tyreek. I kind of like playing him in flex without Tua. If he has maybe a game that he scores like 20 points, that's pretty solid, but it's not going to make him the optimal captain in all likelihood. And I also think, like you just alluded to, he's really struggled against the Bills, or the Bills have done a really good job shutting him down, however that might be. So I think Tyreek fade tonight is really, really interesting as well.
Yes. If you want to have a lot of fun tonight, fade Tyreek, watch the game, and just root for Tyreek to do nothing. It'll just be a ton of fun all the way until the end. No, in Silva's article here in matchups, Tyreek Hill has played McDermott's Bills 5 times. Lines are 769-0, 782-1, 358-0, 969-1, and 233-0. They have kept Tyreek Hill in front of them every single time that they have played the Bills. So look, man, it's scary. I don't want to watch the game and fade Tyreek Hill. Actually, if I do make a Tyreek fade team, I'm just not going to watch the game. I don't want to. I don't need to put myself. I don't need to put myself through that. Anyways, Cody, we don't have anyone on the Dolphins pass catchers projected for more than 4 points except Waddle and Tyreek. And that's what I mean when it gets so concentrated here between Achane, Tyreek, and Waddle. However, you get this sneaking suspicion that in Showdown, maybe a 1 touchdown from Braxton Berrios, or like some smallish line if all the expensive guys go off, and you might need one of these guys. Cody, any more thoughts on other Dolphins pass catchers?
Yeah, first thing that comes to mind is if we're talking about a Tyreek Hill fade, I think the best way to maximize a fade on Tyreek is to probably play some of the more expensive Dolphins, just because if you expect Tyreek to at least fail relative to salary-based expectations, somebody else in this offense, unless the offense just fails outright, somebody else in this offense is going to have to put up some production. And I wrote it in the article, kind of feels like an episode of Groundhog's Day, because it feels like anytime Miami's on the slate, main slate or Showdown, we're all talking about Jalen Waddle as leverage off of the more expensive, more popular pieces of Miami's offense. And yet here we are every week talking about how Tyreek Hill just went nuts, how Devon Achane just went nuts. But I kind of feel it again. I feel like a Jalen Waddle squeeze is coming. I think he's going to be lower owned in both large and small field tournaments as more ownership gets funneled up to these more expensive guys. And you're going to see like 10-ish% captain ownership on Waddle, 40% ownership in flex or in total. And seems like the optimal way to try and maximize that fade on Tyreek, who's going to end up being 70% plus, maybe up to 25% in captain. So I do like Waddle. It feels like a situation where he's just always going to be the bridesmaid, never the bride, and is always going to come in second to Tyreek. But I do like him on the slate, given the salary discount and the ownership discount. And then after that, it gets really gross. This tight end rotation that they deployed last week with Johnny Smith, Durham Smythe, and even Julian Hill, like this was a full-blown 3-headed monster, really rotated routes and opportunities. But I feel like if there's a guy that could separate still and provide a slate-winning score, I still think it's going to be Jonnu Smith. Was in the slot a bunch, and I think was kind of brought in for that role as opposed to guys like Durham Smythe and Julian Hill. And the fact that he's 2,800 priced right there by Jalen Wright, more expensive than Matt Collins, priced right there by Jeff Wilson, I think ownership's going to be really low here. And you can make the same case for Berrios. They ran a bunch of 21 personnel last week with 2 running backs on the field at the same time. That could come down now with Mostert being out, obviously, which could result in more Braxton Berrios in the slot. So I think at 1,200, he would be the one wide receiver that is interesting to me, but it really just feels dart throwy at this point with these non-Tyreek and Jalen Waddle pass catchers for Miami.
Yeah, to be clear on Jonnu Smith, he played 20 snaps in week 1, 12 slot, 5 wide. I mean, he wasn't out there a lot, but when he was out there, at least he was doing the right things. He ran 17 routes, like he didn't play that much, but like Cody said, he's in the pass catching role at least. Okay. Defense and kicker here, Cody. It's an interesting one because there are guys below this range of defense and kicker that are viable. We just talked about Jonnu Smith. We have the Dolphins running backs. What you're asking for, I think, is for those guys to outscore the kickers and the defense in this game. A lot of times when we get high-scoring games, ownership gets depressed, and you kind of see that here on defense and kicker, to be honest. Thoughts on the specialists tonight?
Yeah, I think the Dolphins defense is the one that stands out quite a bit. You see a 1.1 higher base projection and $1,000 cheaper than the Bills for basically the same ownership for all intents and purposes. And if you're firing up the sims and the solver, you're going to see that they sim out really well for that reason. The big question mark is, can they outscore those cheap guys that we've all alluded to? And there's a handful of them on this slate. I think in lineups where you want to be heavy on the Dolphins, which is going to be the kind of natural play anyway, I think the Dolphins make a bunch of sense. I don't think the Bills are necessarily bad, but that $1,000 does go a long way. So I have a little bit more of a lukewarm take on the Bills defense. I would be more likely to include them in the Bills heavy stuff, but still not overly excited about them at 4K. And then the kickers stand out as pretty strong options as well. We've seen DraftKings go a little bit cheaper than they were last year at the kicker position. You would see some guys north of 5K in some instances. And you're seeing the same thing happen here, where Jason Sanders is $400 cheaper as the home favorite and not coming through with much more ownership. So you'll see Jason Sanders sim out pretty well if you're using the solver sims too. And I like him quite a bit. Same situation. I like Jason Sanders if you're using some of those Dolphins heavy stuff as a way to get a little bit lower ownership there and a way to round out some of those 4-2 and 5-1 builds where you're really heavy on the Dolphins side.
Yeah. Okay. Sam, I wanted to ask about this question about Julian Hill. A couple of people noticed this. I noticed this. Julian Hill is popping a little bit in optimals and the solver and in the sims. And that is despite the fact that we only have Julian Hill for 2.6 points. Now, what happens in these showdown slates, it's not that we like Julian Hill that much. It allows you to get everyone else in. The problem with these kind of plays is Julian Hill takes an air ball a lot, and it's really hard to win, especially something large field with 0 in your lineup, even if you jam in all the studs. So do you have any advice for people who are coming up with a lot of Julian Hill in both opto and solver type stuff? I think you're on mute, Sam.
Oh, thank you. I think you just need to kind of recognize that he projects significantly better than everybody priced below him. And so whenever you have a simulation where a certain combination of higher priced guys all hit in the same simulation, then the guy who's projects the best, that makes all those other pieces fit together, is going to fit that lineup. And so that lineup is going to look like it's the optimal lineup quite often relative to all other lineups. And again, that's not incorrect, but it does mean that you need a very specific outcome to happen for Julian Hill to be correct. And if we just tightened up, say, the projection between Alec Ingold and Julian Hill, then that ROI for the Julian Hill stuff would go down notably. So again, it's not incorrect, but I do think you need to just like manage expectations that we're not saying Julian Hill's an amazing play. We're saying that there are certain situations where all the other pieces in those lineups hit together.
Yep, for sure. Okay, yeah, I think that's an important point to take for anyone doing the add-on stuff. By the way, if anybody wants to check that out, you go up here to subscribe, hit this here where it says the solver, and you will get the information that you need about both the optimizer and the sim products. All right. You know what? Let's have some fun. We got about 5 minutes here. I will show you guys maybe a little Simbro stuff here. So I will share my solver screen. Let's say that, so first I need to make some teams. So why don't I go to advanced settings here, and I'll just say, you know what? I want to have any 5-1 Miami. I'm not saying there's the right way to do it. I'm just giving an example. I don't want any 5-1 Miami. I don't want any 4-2 Miami. And you know what? I also want to fade Tyreek Hill. What could possibly go wrong? So let me get 20 lineups here. They'll give me 20 lineups based on optimal lineups, just based on our base projection. Then I go to this simulate button here, and I will simulate it for, let's say, the $3 pylon tonight on DraftKings, and it'll think for a little bit here. And by the way, Sam, while it's thinking, Sam, the way I'm doing this is not the optimal way to do it, right? With putting on the rules and then making stuff like eliminate Tyreek and make stuff like that, right?
Yeah, I mean, I don't like to kind of group things out very strictly like that, but yeah. I don't think it's fair to say it's the wrong way to do it either. I think that's kind of the interesting thing about this, is that there is not necessarily a perfect way to do it. And maybe, you might want to run in stages if you're building through the opto, where maybe for 20% of your lineups, you do group this stuff out. And then for another 20% of your lineups, you group other things out. And then that you kind of manage your exposure that way, instead of trying to run all 150 lineups or however many you're running at the same time.
Yeah. All right. So why don't you explain to the people what they're seeing here and how you would recommend they proceed from this screen?
Yeah, so basically for each lineup, what we've done is we've calculated what your expected ROI would be. And that's an average ROI aggregated across all the different simulations. We have 20,000 simulations behind the scene here. And so just like Adam just did, I click to sort on the sim ROI descending. And this is basically telling us in order which lineups we think are the best in terms of your expected return. So if you then click on the little chart next to one of the lineups, we can see the exact distribution of how we think this will rate out. So we see this lineup has ROI of 280.73%. And basically we can see that the reason why is because this lineup has an extremely high top 1% rate. We talk a lot about how one good way to kind of judge your own performance in GPPs is to see at what rate your lineups are hitting the top 1% of all lineups. So if you have a lineup or your performance overall, you hit more 1% lineups than the field, so your 1% rate is greater than 1%, then you're doing pretty well. And this one hits at like a 5% rate. So that's why the ROI is so high. It doesn't mean that this lineup would actually win 5% of the time, but it does mean in our simulations, it's hitting the top 1% at a 5% rate. Mm-hmm. So again, it's not going to be a exactly perfect estimate because there's lots of inputs here. But we do think it is the best of the lineups that were just run in this latest batch.
In terms of dupes, how would you tell people to think about, well, this lineup's going to be duped a lot, this lineup might not be duped a lot once they're on this screen?
Yeah, so we do take into consideration how often we think each lineup was going to be duped. If, let's say, we think the lineup that projects best is going to be duped by 50% of the field, and that was in our inputs, and then you ran that lineup through the simulator, well, that ROI is going to be extremely negative, even if we do think it is by far the best lineup, because you need it to be somewhat unique in order to not have a massive chop. I think one of the slates last week, we saw a pretty big chop, and I don't know, like 200 people split the first prize or whatever. And, you know, that's fun, that's great. But in the long run, it's not going to give you a high ROI. So a couple different ways to think about it is, one, like I said, it's already factored into the ROI. It's not a perfect measure because we have to estimate the dupe rate for all of the many lineups that are behind the scenes. But it is a good directionally correct measure. And then you can also look at the percent owned column on the far right. And I think the last thing to do is just look at the lineup, think about it, and say, would I have come up with this lineup if I were building it by hand? Does it kind of naturally fall into place? Like we were talking about earlier with Tyreek Hill lineups. Let's say you put him in captain, then okay, you want Tua in flex. Well, I don't want to fade Josh Allen, so I'm going to put him in flex too. Okay, now I need some good value. Well, Jeff Wilson's a really good value. You know, you kind of fall into certain builds. And if you can imagine that you could have built this lineup very easily by hand, well, it's a really good chance that the field is going to build that lineup by hand too.
I messed that up before. If you want to completely eliminate Tyreek, you need to eliminate him from both captain and flex, which is what I just did there. Yeah. Couple of quick questions on this. TMS says, I've gotten lineups to look pretty flat, but I have a really high ROI. I assume that is because it doesn't get duped when it wins. Is that the right way to think about it, Sam?
Yeah, we're at least if you're simming for one of these very large MME type GPP lottos, then yeah, you're playing for the 1% outcomes, and those are the ones that are going to impact the ROI. Having a high cash rate in the milli maker is not going to give you a good ROI. You need to have ones that win. And so that lineup, if it has a super high ROI, it is winning and it's not getting duped too much. I'd say most of the lineups that are hitting the pure number one spot, we probably have duped in our field lineups, but it's just a matter of how often it's duped.
Right. So like I just eliminated Tyreek from all this stuff, and you see everything looks worse because we have such a big projection on Tyreek. But like, you know, the sim would help me think about what teams perform well against our field lineups when Tyreek is not in them, and something like HN captain with Tua in flex, like that makes intuitive sense to me, you know? So yeah. Okay. Nobody's listening to any of this. All they want is the flag plants. They want the flag plants. They want the flag plants. It is time for the flag plants. Cody, I shall give you the floor as I get back to the projections here for flag plant tonight, Bills, Dolphins.
Yeah, I saw the golf bro takes, or the football bro takes in the chat here. Keon Coleman isn't a separator. Keon Coleman can't be Stephon Diggs. Guess what? When you're 6'3", 213 pounds, and a grown ass man, your size is your separator. So I think we're going to get a breakout performance here from the second round rookie, Keon Coleman. If not for the ugly box score, I think we'd have a little bit more of a bullish outlook on Keon Coleman. 21.7% target share, 31.3% first read target share, 28.1% air yard share. All these other guys in this offense are low ADOT guys. He's going to be the guy that gets the stuff downfield. And when that happens, and when he and Josh Allen connect, there is going to be a slate winning score in his range of outcomes. So I'm going to flag plant $5,800 Keon Coleman.
Does seem very cheap. Does seem very cheap for Keon Coleman. I'm still skeptical about some holes in his game in general and how much they're going to throw and everything. But yeah, seems very cheap there. 5,800 Keon Coleman, 36% total ownership. Sam, your flag plant.
I'm going to go with James Cook here. I think he's a great captain play. I'm going to have him in the flex too, but especially at captain, I think he takes a lot of leverage off of a number of plays. I think he takes leverage off of Josh Allen, although I'm happy to play Josh Allen and flex when Cook is captain. But also if Cook is getting there in an optimal way, he's probably getting at least one touchdown that would steal from a Josh Allen touchdown. And, you know, we talked about James Cook's usage last week and how Josh Allen got the goal line carries, but James Cook was in there at the goal line. And I feel pretty good about that, especially if Josh Allen wants to take it easy on the short week. Maybe Cook gets an extra red zone carry. And I think he's just a good matchup in general against this Miami defense. And I think he's just an overall good leverage play. So all the pieces aligning there.
Okay, I like that one too. I think those are both super sharp, super interesting. I'm going to stick on the Bills side. You know, my concern on the Dalton Kincaid stuff is that he has very low ADOT. He's not great after the catch, and so he needs volume, right? And if it's going to be real flat and the Bills aren't going to throw that much, then Kincaid isn't great. However, to get someone like Kincaid at 4% captain or 30% overall ownership here, I think is really, really intriguing. He's the guy on Buffalo who I think if someone's going to catch 8 balls in this game, I think Kincaid is the one. We also have, from a narrative perspective, Cody, tight ends dominating showdown slates. I mean, there's a long and storied history of tight ends on showdown slates, getting dongs, getting double dongs, et cetera, et cetera. And I did want to flag plant a tight end because I got to give a shout out to Shannon Sharp, man. I mean, I don't know if this was staged. I don't know what was going on there. No matter what, the way that him and you guys got to watch this interview between Ocho Cinco and Shannon Sharp. It is the funniest thing. I thought those guys were just like kind of clown. They're actually hilarious. Like they are really, really funny dudes. So cannot recommend the Shannon Sharp. In honor of all tight ends, flag plant Dalton Kincaid tonight. All right. These shows are going to be more behind the paywall for in-season subscribers starting soon. Monday's show will be for in-season subscribers. If you do not have in-season yet, you get access to a ton of Showdown content here in the NFL tab. We, of course, have the show, Cody's Breakdown, all our projections, Silva's matchup, and then the sim analysis, which you'll see here, which Sam works on some takes away for in-season subscribers here, takeaways that we have from the sim for all the players. Also, if you're super hardcore and you want to get in here on the optimizer and simulator stuff, information here. For Cody, for Sam, for the literal dozens of people behind the scenes that put all the work to show you all this stuff, I am Adam. Good luck, everybody.